I still can't forget that day. 12 years ago, I lived as a homeless person during some period in my 20s. It was a time when I used to walk the streets and survive on a single loaf of bread. One day, I was sleeping on the street and had a strange dream. In the dream, a monster with 100 eyes was running towards me. I woke up screaming as the monster came right in front of me. It was a dark morning, and as my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, I realized that a stranger was standing right in front of me. I was so startled. Then he came right up to my nose and started groping my face with his hand. I shouted, asking what he was doing, being astonished. Then he stopped, put his palms together, and chanted strange incantations as he walked backwards. I can't remember clearly, but I think he said something like this: "The visible world is fake." He was dressed like a monk and was walking with his eyes closed. I was so horrified, but was so tired and hungry that I didn't even have the energy left to do anything. So I just slept again. However, the next day I overheard other homeless people talking to each other. "Is everyone okay?" "I think we're fine. Fortunately, everyone seems to have blocked it well." I asked them what they were talking about, and they told me something shocking. The story was that someone unknown was coming every night and secretly plucking out the eyeballs of homeless people. It was the so-called eyeball hunter. As soon as I heard that, I was shocked and stopped breathing for a moment, because it seemed to me that he was the person I saw in the morning. Then I found out why so many homeless people here had no eyes. I was overwhelmed with too much fear, but it is rumored that he didn't kill anyone. One day, he plucked out the eyeballs of a homeless man, and the homeless man shouted that he would rather be killed. But the eyeball hunter left, saying that it was his principle not to kill humans. My whole body trembled hearing that. At that time, if I had only woken up 3 seconds later, I couldn't even imagine what would have happened. Only then did I find out why the homeless there were staying vigil every night. I've always thought that they were on watch, not to be deprived of food, but I didn't know it was actually to protect their eyes. Since then, I decided to join a group of homeless people because I couldn't sleep on my own, and I was able to stay safe for a while, keeping a night watch in the group. Then one day, early in the morning, I heard a loud scream. Everyone woke up, but one homeless man was rolling around, putting his hands over his eyes. There was blood all over his face and on the floor, and I saw the back of the monk who was running at a tremendous speed in the distance. "There is an eyeball hunter!" I could hear people shouting and buzzing. We hurriedly called an ambulance and he was taken away. It turned out that the person who was on night watch fell asleep for a while, and it happened in the middle of it. We reported it to the police. I was really terrified and felt that I couldn't stay there any longer. I tried desperately to get out of there. Finally able to end my homeless life, I rented a small house and started my new life. After some time passed, I visited the homeless people I was close with. They welcomed me, and according to what they said, they heard that the eyeball hunter was caught by the police. And the eyeball hunter said to the police as follows: "It is only after human beings see the world through their eyes that prejudices and sins arise. Only when you are not deceived by appearances do you know the true meaning of life. That is why I remove people's eyes, so that they can truly become enlightened." He believed it would save people, and he had no eyes either. It was self-removed. However, he said that he can see the world through his third eye, called chakra, after long practice, even though he has no eyes. How he sees is still a mystery. and I suddenly remembered one thing. On the day he first appeared in front of me, the black plastic bag he was holding in his hand. The bag contained several round-shaped objects. I thought it was just fruit or something, but I just found out what those things were. I'm still suffering from insomnia every day. He's in prison, but for some reason I keep thinking he's likely to break into my house. Now I sleep with my glasses on every day because I feel like I can protect my eyes by doing this. I want to get out of this fear as soon as possible. If only I could erase him from my memory.
I live in the UK, and I'm a 19-year-old guy, and I've been working at a bar for the past 2 years. I normally finish very early in the morning. This happened about a year ago, and I'll never forget it. It had started as a normal shift. I got there and started taking orders and making cocktails and all the stuff. And 6 hours went by, and it was about midnight when 2 loud male customers who were in their mid-30s at least came in the bar. They looked like they had been out all day and didn't seem to care what they had said or who they said it to. One of them stood about 6 feet, and he had a slim build. He looked like he was an active drug user or something along those lines. And the other was about 5'9" with an unhealthy build. His face looked shabby, and he had messy hair and yellow teeth. He made me feel uneasy, but I had to do my job. I approached them and asked if they would like to order a drink or anything, and they both just looked blankly at me. I stood there looking at them both silently while music was blaring out of the speakers. I then broke the silence, saying I will come back over in a few minutes to ask again, and I went to another table. About 2 minutes had passed, and they ended up approaching a group of girls about my age and wouldn't leave them alone. You could tell the girls felt uncomfortable. Now, I'm not saying I'm tough or anything, and I stand at about 5'9" and weigh about 140 pounds, so I'm not exactly an intimidating person. But I went over and asked the girls if they were okay, and if they knew these guys who sat with them. They all looked at me, eyes widening, shaking their heads and saying no, and they won't leave us alone. I sternly asked the men to move tables, and if I have to ask again, they'll be thrown out. They suddenly got up and glared at me with crazed eyes. I get this a lot at the bar I work at, so it didn't really bother me. They slowly walked past me and through the exits, and I thought that was the end of it. How wrong I was. The bar closed an hour after that, and we ushered out the rest of the customers so we could clean up at the end of the night. The girls who I helped thanked me and asked for my number, and I politely declined, saying I wasn't interested. After we had finished cleaning up the bar, it was about 2 a.m., and one of my friends asked if I wanted a lift home. But I only lived a 20-minute walk from where I work, so I politely declined and said I would see them tomorrow. I started walking, putting one earphone in so I could listen to some music while walking home. I'd made it about 5 minutes into the walk before I heard a muffled scream coming from a small alleyway to my left. I took out my earphone and proceeded to listen again, and sure enough, I heard it again. At this point, I called out asking if someone was there and if they were okay while slowly moving towards the sound. I pulled up my phone and shined my torch towards the noise. What I saw terrified me. The 2 guys from the bar had grabbed one of the girls from the bar and was attacking her, and for her safety, I'll leave it at that. Her eyes were crazed, pleading for me to help her, and I just stood there frozen. The 2 guys looked at me, and the smaller one said to me, "You'd better turn around and leave, boy, or things are gonna get serious." It snapped me out of my fear, and I said, trying to be as confident as possible, "Let her go, or else." I said these words feeling terrified, and I think those guys could tell because he got up and moved towards me, raising his fists ready to fight. Instinctively, I responded by getting into a boxing stance. He swung his fist at me, and due to him being drunk, I easily moved out of the way. I clocked him on his temple, and he dropped to the floor, smashing his head against the concrete. I turned towards the girl and asked if she was okay until I realized the taller man had moved. He dived at me, tackling me to the ground. I panicked as we rolled around wrestling on the ground for a few seconds, and he pinned me to the ground. He started screaming at me and began punching me. In that instance, seeing his crazed eyes inches away from my face, I thought I was gonna die. And in the corner of my eye, I saw the girl I had tried to save grab a spray and begin to spray it in the man's eyes. He let out a massive scream and fell backwards onto the ground, clenching his eyes. In that instant, I grabbed the hand of the girl and we ran all the way back to my house. We quickly got inside, locked all the doors, and we were silent for a good half hour. I broke the silence, asking her if she was okay and if she was hurt. She didn't reply, just sat there curled up in a ball on the floor. I said to her, I think we should stay here tonight, and that I would take her to the police station early next morning. She nodded her head in agreement. I gave her my bed, I took some blankets and pillows and tried to fall asleep on the couch, but I couldn't. In the morning, I kept my promise and took her to the police station and gave my description of the men. The officer said thank you and sent me on my way. He assured me he would take care of the girl now. I said my goodbyes to the girl and she still didn't speak to me. I felt terrible about what had happened to her, but I was glad I was there to help. I had to miss work the next day due to being battered and exhausted from the night before. While I was at home, I saw on the news that 2 men were apprehended by the police and both locked away almost instantly. I hope they get what they fucking deserve. The scariest part of the story is what if I took the ride my friend offered? What would have happened to the girl? I dare not even think about it, and I was lucky enough to save her. It all started with a knock on the door. It was around 10 p.m. The kitchen was right beside the front door, so I could see the front yard. I looked out only to see a man with a mask looking right at the door. Then the lights went off. Whoever was at the front door had left, and I could hear many windows being shuffled. I started fearing for my life. Shivers went down my spine. I am right now enrolled in the Durham Regional Police Academy to become a police officer in the future. So, in my parents' room, I put my gun, which was an RCMP model 3432, into a safe that my parents store money in. My mother, who also looked as frightened as I, said we should make a run for it into the backyard and sprint towards my uncle's house, which was 3 blocks away from us. But I looked towards the backyard glass sliding doors, and I could see the silhouette of a man and realized it looked like he was holding a knife. My mother and I decided to hide in the basement, as it had the most durable lock. We brought in kitchen knives and hid there in the vast darkness. My mother was crying, so I reassured her that everything was going to be okay. An hour went by, just staying there but not hearing any noises. My father should have been home by now, I thought to myself. We carefully went out of the basement and we saw that there was nothing. That's when I realized that I had a gun upstairs. I felt a little guilty as I'm learning to become a cop, and cops are supposed to investigate these kinds of situations. I didn't know the code for the safe, so my mother opened it and I got out my gun. My mother was beside me with a kitchen knife as we went into every room to see if anyone had broken in. We didn't find anything, so we concluded that they were just kids who were ding-dong ditching. My mother was still paranoid as my sister's washer window was cracked open. Both my sisters were on a camping field trip as the school year ended. Due to my mother's paranoia, I slept with her in the master bedroom, and I even brought my gun. She asked where my father was, and I said, he's probably just busy. I went to bed, but awoke around 2 a.m. to hear my mother shouting. She was in the closet, looking at something, and something from the closet snatched her. I picked up my gun and pointed towards the closet, but something from behind me started strangling me. I twisted his arm and pointed the gun at him. The other man holding my mother pointed a knife towards my mother, but immediately I shot his hand. My shooting skills have succeeded as I successfully hit his arm and he dropped his knife. My mother picked it up as I let go of the man and pointed the gun towards both men. I told my mother to check the signal and electricity cable, and she rushed to check. In a minute, the lights turned on and notifications were popping up on my phone. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, and my mother called my father. I unmasked one of the men, and it was this 40-year-old man with a lot of facial hair and looked frightened. I unmasked the other one and was shocked to see my father's ex-best friend, Tony. I remember meeting him a lot, and my father and he were close, but this man got involved with drugs or something. My father saw his changes and decided that this will eventually turn into a toxic friendship, so left him. But he was very aggressive, and my father was beaten up by him and his friends. My father ran back home and called the police on his best friend, and at court testified against him, and Tony was sentenced to 16 years in jail for illegal drug use. It had been 16 years, but I didn't know how he got to our location and why he would rob us. The police came and arrested them. Their car had weapons. My father didn't pick up when the police went to go see his office, and he was not there. He left his work office 5 hours ago. My mother and I cried, and they found my father's body the next day at a dumpster, as it was wrapped in a garbage bag. He had 17 stab wounds. Both my sisters had to come back, and we all cried. Tony and his friend, who we found out was named Tyler, were both sentenced to death. We had a funeral for my father shortly after. I still can't forget that incident. 3 weeks after that incident, I rebuilt and styled the basement and put it for rent. I got a part-time job at Walmart, and my mother and one of my sisters worked for my mother's friend who had a dress shop. That's how we kept the house, as we didn't want to sell our house. I became a police officer at the Durham Regional Police, and I've been working for 10 years. I purchased a new house, which was a 2-garage, huge house for my sisters, mother, and me. I rented my former house, and I am 28 now. I'm going to get married this year. I was even told by my chief that I might be appointed as the chief of police for the Durham Regional Police. My life is going great right now, but I wish my father could see this, and I could give him a big hug in person. Here in the Philippines, supernatural are very common, and we have many scary urban legends and myths, as well as scary monsters. I'm going to share my dad's experiences that nobody ever imagined he would experience. My parents are both teachers, and when I was 7, we transferred to the small island in the Visayas. My dad was a drunkard, but he's very good at his job as a teacher. Before, people didn't have any bathrooms, so we would just poop at this mangrove forest that was at the center of the island. We lived near the forest, so we would just take a poop there. I was 10 years old when this happened. One night, my mom asked my dad to help her with carrying stuff to the boat around 3 a.m. since she was pregnant and she had to be early at the seminar. My dad agreed, even though he was drinking that night. You might think why we need a boat. You see, it takes 1 hour to get to the mainland where the seminar takes place, and before the lights were cut off every 12 a.m., so we would wait until dusk to get the energy power back. After my dad dropped my mom at the pier, my dad suddenly had to go to the bathroom, but since we didn't have any bathrooms, he just pooped at my flower garden near the mangroves. When he was about to poop, he saw something from afar. He described it as a snake-like, but it was bigger and it was half pig. My dad continued to poop since he thought he was just hallucinating and it was just a pig. But he couldn't get the feeling out that something was wrong. He looked back and saw that there was nothing there. And when he pulled up his little flashlight, the light in the lighter, he was shocked that he hurriedly went inside the house, not even pulling his pants up, and hurriedly got the samurai he had. He gathered up the courage and he went back. The thing was not there anymore. He couldn't sleep, so he stayed up and told his friends about what he saw. He explained that he had seen something like an animal, but half was human, and this time the other half was that of a snake. When he turned the flashlight on, he saw very bloody red eyes, and that face was that of a human, but deformed, and he saw it near to him, only 6 meters away. His friends just laughed and told him that maybe it was just imagination, but he insisted it was not. Then suddenly, one of my neighbors came up to us and asked if we had a pig, a very big black pig, and explained that he saw the pig around 1 a.m. near our backyard, where my dad had pooped. I watched my dad shocked. We realized that the thing was not just after hanging out there. It was after my mom that she was pregnant around that time. I don't know if you'll find this believable, but I saw with my own eyes. My dad was truly terrified around the time he encountered that thing.
Back in high school, I was a school bully. Now, I'm a grown-up. But I still regret those days. Well, more specifically, what I regret is not about being a school bully back then. My regret originates from a terrible memory, which I'm going to tell you about now. In those days, I and my friends, Tom and Blake, used to hang out together and bully others. And there was one classmate, in particular, we victimized the most. I can't mention his name here, but we used to call him the punching machine. We often punched him and asked what our score was. Then he rated us, and we continued to punch him until each of us got a higher, more satisfactory score. He was a big guy, about 6'3" tall, who used to be beaten by others. Even after we became adults, we often went to him and bullied him. One fall day, the sky looked exceptionally blood red, and it has bled into my memory as the day. While we were bullying him as usual, he suddenly put out his hand, saying this:
"It feels like I'm gonna cry. Please stop it, or I'll cry and all of you guys will be dead."
It froze us for a second, but soon, Tom burst into laughter and said,
"If you cry, what? We're gonna be dead? Yeah, maybe. We are gonna die laughing, you dumbass."
Then Blake said,
"Uh-oh, seriously. We have never seen him crying. Let's make it real today."
Then this dude roared super loudly like a big lion, and his tears started falling to the ground. It was the first time we saw him crying. His shoulders heaved like crazy, and he breathed in and out so heavily, like it was almost penetrating into the ground. When we realized he was getting enraged, he suddenly pounced on Tom and choked him. Tom struggled hard to escape from him, but he was no match for him at all. He squeezed Tom's throat with incredible power, and Tom's eyes were about to pop out of his head. Then he threw Tom against the wall. Tom slammed into the wall and just passed out. I thought he might be dead because Tom hit the wall so hard. He now started at me, and I looked to the side. Blake was already running away. I started shivering from top to bottom in fear. Walking slowly towards me, he said,
"My mom said no one can stop me once I cry, so she's never gotten on my nerves. Neither has my dad."
Suddenly, pausing for a moment, he started writhing in agony and pulling out his hair. Then he said in a low and cold voice,
"I'll give you 3 seconds. Run for your life."
His eyes already turned into a murderer's. His pupils were red as if smeared with blood. I thought I had to run away, but I couldn't move my legs. Before I knew, he was already right in front of me. He suddenly lifted me up without any difficulty, just like picking up a basketball or something. Then he hurled me down on the ground. As soon as I was thrown to the ground, I blacked out for a bit. After a while, I heard a police siren. Yes, Blake called the police. I opened my eyes and saw him. He was looking at me, standing still. He was still crying. He didn't run away, although the police siren was getting closer. And when he found me opening my eyes, he threw a punch at my face. I couldn't breathe. With his continuous punches, I was getting knocked out. He said,
"You want to live? Then stop my tears."
There was nothing I could do but tremble in overwhelming fear. At that moment, the police finally arrived, and they told him to put his hands up, but he ignored them and spoke in a low mumble, walking heavily towards the police.
"No one can stop me when I cry. Even police can't."
The police shouted urgently,
Stop, or I'll shoot!"
But he didn't stop. Instead, he rushed the police officer just in an instant. The officer immediately shot a taser at him, but he didn't stop, even though he got tased. He picked up the officer and threw him. Then another officer ran to him to arrest, but he was also knocked down to the ground by his powerful punch. just like a piece of wood. And finally, with a bang, the sound of a gun. He stopped. After about 3 seconds, his knees touched the ground, and soon he fell to the ground. He was lying on the ground with his eyes wide open, not moving anymore. The officer checked his pulse on the neck, then sent the other officers a hand sign. He's dead. My vision was blurred, but I could see the police officers running to me in a hurry. I felt like this was all a dream. No, I rather wished it was just a dream, but it wasn't. Since that day, I have emotionally suffered so much from this memory. It completely changed my personality. I can't meet anyone. I'm cooped up inside the house all the time. It has been already 10 years. Although I'm getting better little by little, this trauma still affects my whole life. If I see anyone crying, I can't stand it, and I just run away. There was also a time that I fortunately had a girlfriend, but when she cried, I ran away, like an insane man. After some time, we just broke up. Many years have passed, but I still can't overcome this trauma. Remembering that day still makes me shudder, just like a helpless tree, fluttering in the typhoon.
Back when I lived with an ex in LA, California, I had an orange and white female pit bull named Missy. One night, when I took her out front in my yard to go to the bathroom, my next door neighbor, I recognized him but had never spoken with him before, was walking by. There was no other people around, and the street was completely empty besides him, myself, and my dog. He struck up conversation, and suddenly and abruptly began quickly walking into my yard and right at me. He was big, gross, creepy, and probably in his 40s or 50s, while I was only 19. It was one of those moments where someone does one small thing that normally wouldn't seem threatening, but your instincts, your feelings just immediately start telling you that something is wrong and you are in danger. My dog suddenly pulled at her leash, snarling and barking at the guy. She even had a line of fur down her back that was standing straight up. She was always the nicest dog, never acted that way. I guess her instincts were freaking out just like mine were. The man stopped dead in his tracks, stared at my dog with fear on his face, then looked up at me and asked me, "Does your dog bite?" And even though she never bit anyone, I lied and said, "Yeah, she bites," while looking him right in the eye and not blinking. He quickly backed out of my yard and rushed into his house and never tried to talk to me again, even though I lived next door to him for several years after that. Years and years later, after I'd broken up with my ex I lived with, I moved back home to Oregon. I was bored one day, and I'd recently learned that there's a website where you can see if any sex offenders live in your neighborhood. I decided to check it out because I loved going for walks at night, but no longer owned a dog who could protect me. I looked up my area where I lived, then decided to look up the area I had lived in California. A picture of that creepy next door neighbor popped up on my phone. He was a sex offender, and the whole time I lived there, I never knew. So that's the story of how my dog saved me from being attacked by my neighbor who was a sex offender. I loved that dog, and I miss her.
This is a story about my friend Anna, who works as a flight attendant. A few years ago, she was on a returning flight from Southeast Asia. While preparing for takeoff, she got into a confrontation with a passenger about the placement of luggage. The elderly man insisted that his personal belongings be stored separately from those of other passengers. But because he had not made a request for such accommodations in advance, the crew was unable to fulfill his wishes. Anna had recently started this job, and although she knew how to deal with many types of unhappy customers, this one in particular gave her a hard time. Eventually, a senior flight attendant stepped in and resolved the issue, but the old man was visibly displeased. Later, Anna was going around and taking trash from the passengers. When she passed by the old man, he held up a little wooden box and told her to dispose of it. The box was rectangular, roughly the size of an average palm, and its lid was carved with markings that looked like an ancient foreign script. Though hesitant at first, Anna did not wish to exacerbate the situation with this passenger, so she complied. The moment her fingers touched the box, Anna felt a strange sensation flow throughout her body, but it was only for a brief second. She didn't think much of it and continued down the aisle. About halfway through the flight was when Anna began noticing something wrong. She developed a slight headache and was feeling dizzy and weak. Attributing this to lack of sleep, she tried her best to power through, but it soon proved to be too difficult to do so. Her senior was aware of the situation and kindly escorted her to the crew resting area. After taking some Advil and a cup of water, Anna lied down for a nap. During her sleep, Anna initially sensed numerous tiny hairs brushing against her leg. She ignored it, thinking it was just the fuzzy blanket. At certain points, however, she did vividly recall experiencing pain. It wasn't excruciating to any degree, more like someone poking her knee with an extremely small needle. And each instant lasted for about a millisecond. Because she was so fatigued at the time, she simply shifted her position and continued to rest without opening her eyes. Upon waking some hours later, Anna felt refreshed and ready to return to work. She sat up from the bed to step into her high heels. But as soon as her right foot entered the shoe, she immediately pulled out because her toe had come into contact with an unfamiliar object inside. Unsure what it was, she was scared to reach in. Instead, she picked up the shoe, turned it upside down, and gave it a few knocks against the bedside table. To her surprise, a huge insect fell onto the ground, generating a loud hiss as it landed. The insect had a red body with black dots on the back and white triangular wings that spanned the length of an adult hand. But that wasn't the most terrifying feature. The horror, which caused Anna to drop the shoe, dash out of the room, and scream at the top of her lungs, was the sight of 4 hairy tentacles protruding from the insect's rear. It looked like a product of breeding moths with centipedes, a creature you might find in a sci-fi film, whose protagonist was a mad scientist. Needless to say, it was an embarrassing moment for Anna, running from the resting area to the cabin, where her colleagues and passengers could witness her terror. A male flight attendant quickly came to her aid and, after hearing her account of the incident, decided to investigate. Anna, still in shock, opted to stay where she was. As she stood there in her stockinged feet, hair in a mess from sleeping, she nervously glanced at the passengers. What she saw sent chills down her spine. The elderly man, whom Anna had argued with earlier, was staring straight at her with a grim expression on his face. His body was stationary, but his lips were moving nonstop, as if chanting some sort of ritual. Even as she paced around the cabin, anxiously anticipating what the colleague would find, the man's eyes would not leave her. 10 minutes passed, and the male flight attendant came back to report that a thorough search of the room yielded nothing. He comforted Anna by suggesting that she probably just experienced a hypnopompic hallucination, ones that occur at the end of sleep. This explanation put her fear at ease, though only temporarily. While buckling up for landing, Anna's skirt had slid up just enough for the senior flight attendant to catch a glimpse of something strange. "Did you bump on something?" the senior inquired. Anna followed her colleague's gaze to her left leg. On the inner portion of her knee, barely visible through her skin-toned pantyhose, was a linear patch of darkness, about 3 to 4 centimeters in length. She rubbed the area. It didn't hurt, and the skin was not raised. Unsure of what it was, she shrugged and answered, "I guess I must have." Exhausted after a 20-hour flight, Anna returned home and headed straight for the shower. While undressing, she took a closer look at her leg, and that's when she realized the dark patch on her skin was actually a set of irregular markings which resembled the inscriptions on the wooden box that the elderly passenger handed her. She then immediately remembered the prickly pain she felt during her nap on the plane. The location of the pain was exactly where the marks were. In a state of panic, she hopped into the shower. But no matter how hard she scrubbed, the dark spot would not fade. Since then, certain types of insects seem to have an affinity for Anna, often appearing at unexpected places around the house. More than once, she found them under the blankets as she was getting ready for bed. Other times, she would awaken in the middle of the night to find them crawling on her. Consequently, she has been living in constant fear of her surroundings, not knowing when a bug might come out to attack her. To this day, Anna still has that mark on her leg. Whenever anyone questions her about it, she would recount the horrible experience on that flight. I have personally examined the mark, and though I'm more inclined to believe the squiggly patterns are just an uncommon variation of varicose veins, after all, flight attendants do spend a majority of the day on their feet, Anna insists that the old man had somehow placed a curse on her when she came into contact with the mysterious wooden box. Though I can't say I agree with this theory, there are certain points of the story I am unable to explain. For example, if the markings on her leg were indeed due to varicose veins, why had nobody noticed them before? Did they magically appear right after Anna's encounter with the old man? And why are there suddenly all these insects around her? Was all of this really just a coincidence?
When I saw him for the first time, he caught my attention at first sight. Ethan. He had a handsome face and was always surrounded by women. The reason I approached him actually was that I wanted to be as popular as he was with the women. Yes, it was me, no one else, who approached him. It was me who drove myself into the pit of evil. When I was a freshman in college, I went and got close with him, and we quickly became best friends. But at some point, there was something odd about him. It was the rotten smell from him I had never smelled before. I said to him half-jokingly, "Do you work at the fish factory at night?" But he just looked at me without any change in his facial expression. There were also days when the smell was particularly strong, and each time he looked very tired. My other friends and I had more and more questions about him over time, but when we asked him, he never answered. What's even creepier was that when I shook hands with him or even touched him, the smell lingered on my body for several days. I couldn't stand it, so I asked him what on earth was causing the smell. Then he applied an ointment-like toothpaste under my nose and replied this: "Wait, you'll soon start smelling this scent on your body as well." He even laughed out loud. But one day, he stopped coming to school. He didn't even answer me, and I was worried about what had happened to him. In the meantime, I heard a rumor about him. The rumor was that he went to prison. I was shocked, but there was a more shocking fact. And at the same time, I found the cause of the smell. What was revealed by the police was that he was dealing in human corpses. He was making a fortune buying and selling undamaged corpses through the dark web. It was difficult for the police to find evidence because some time had passed since he had already made transactions through the dark web. Recently, one student from our school went missing, and during the process searching for him, Ethan's crimes were revealed. The missing friend was found with a cold body in the basement of Ethan's house. In the basement, there was a specifically constructed coffin to keep the body from decaying. Also, there were several drugs to use to embalm the corpses. He had made a lot of money from these deals and had plans to buy land and move very far away. When I heard this news, I was greatly shocked, and I got goosebumps at myself, who had tried to be friends with such a person. Eventually, time passed and everything was slowly forgotten, but there is one thing I still can't forget. It was something Ethan had said to me before. One day, he suddenly invited me to go swimming with him at his house. The swimming pool at his house was strangely large and deep. The water was so deep that you actually couldn't see the bottom. I didn't go into the water because I was scared. He teased me for being a coward and tried to push me into the water, but I stepped away and didn't go in. And now that I reckon about it, that decision likely saved my life. For some reason, the feeling of fear I felt that day, I don't think it was just because of the depth of the water in the pool. There was something in his eyes and expression that gave me goosebumps. If I had jumped into that pool at that time, I would have probably ended up lying in the coffin he made. And like the other victims, I would have been sold to someone without a trace, and I would have given him another big paycheck. It's Hansiki Chaudhry, and I am from India. This is not a horror story, but an emotional one. This all started this year when my maternal grandfather got sick one day and my mom and dad went to meet him, but unfortunately he died. After that, my father gets symptoms of COVID and headed home, so me and my brother were staying with my grandmother. After coming home, he starts to get so much fever and cough that he has to be admitted to the hospital. He stayed there for 5 days and died on April 30th. After getting the news, I fainted, but days after that, we started to get our normal life back. But one night my father came into my dream and he was in the car with me. We were driving somewhere and then the car stopped to a dark bridge. I see him get out of the car and start going somewhere. I immediately stopped him and asked him where he was going, and he said he didn't know, and then I became aware that this was the last time we would see each other, so we both hugged each other and started crying. I said he had a dangerous type of coronavirus. Then I asked him what we do in our life. He answered, saying that he didn't know. Then I noticed a man standing behind him, and I asked my father who he was. My father said that the man was trying to take him somewhere. I cried some more, and then we said our final goodbyes. After that, I never saw my dad in my dreams. I really miss him. I know he will never come back. So the only message I want to give you is to try to spend time with your parents and siblings, because they could vanish at any time. Now, I wet myself just by thinking about Omegle. If I could go back to that day, I would never go on Omegle. One day I turned on Omegle and got connected with a man wearing a zombie mask. I heard his voice behind the mask. "Oh, hey, you're either very lucky or unlucky to meet me on Omegle." He lowered the camera slightly, and behind the man, one person was rolling around on the floor, grabbing his face. He was letting out a great, painful groan. I was shocked and shortly tried to leave the chat room right away, but he continued talking. "Aren't you curious why this guy is doing this?" I was trembling silently without saying anything. Why didn't I leave the room that time? I think it was just because I was so curious, to be honest. He said, "My hobby is to turn on Omegle whenever I get bored and pick and kill one of the people I meet. There are so many different people in this world. Do you know how thrilling it is to be able to choose the one you want? It's easy to find the IP address like this." After a while, he started talking about the names of the streets near my house. I clamped my hands over my mouth in shock. Then he said, "I'm going to ask you a simple question from now on. If you answer correctly, I'll let you go. But if you answer incorrectly, you'll end up like this guy. So, let's begin. First question, Why was this guy picked by me? Guess the answer. He pointed to the man groaning on the floor. I was perplexed. Then he said, "Oh, yes. If you disconnect intentionally, your life will end too." I was thinking about how to get out of this situation. Thousands of thoughts popped into my head during that moment. At the time, my whole body started sweating, and he said, "Don't drag it on too long. I'm a type of person who gets very upset easily." I stammered, did he make you angry?" He hit the desk and said, "Of course. When I took off the mask, this guy looked at my face and distorted his facial expression. I asked the guy how my face was like. Then he said, 'I'd rather die than live with a face like that.' And he laughed like it was really funny. After hearing that, I made up my mind to make him as he said." Then he slowly took off his mask. Under the mask, his face was severely crushed, as if all the skin had melted away. He continued talking. "I went to his house and poured hydraulic acid on his face to make it look the same. Then he grabbed my leg, saying, 'Please save me.' I said, 'Didn't you say that you would rather die than have a face like mine?' Then he rubbed his palms together and begged for forgiveness. I said to him, 'I will give you 3 days. Do what you said with your mouth.' And 3 days passed, but he didn't do anything. That's why I brought him here now, to kill him." How is it? Isn't it funny? I was shivering from top to bottom in shock and couldn't say anything more. Then he said, "Now, you tell me, how do you like my face?" He was smiling brightly with a blood-stained face. When I hesitated, he held up a piece of paper with my home address, which was written on it. "Tell me right now. If you don't answer, I'll get to you now." I said, I like your face." I really didn't know what to say. I thought it was the best option. Then he answered, "Oh yeah? So do you want to be just like my face?" I couldn't answer. Then he said, "Why? Don't you want to be like this? Why? You said you liked it." He started to freak out. Then he madly slammed the desk and kicked the man lying behind him. The man's moans of pain echoed through the room. My whole body started to tremble with fear like crazy. I didn't know what to do. He calmed down after a while and spoke to me. "I'll give you 3 days. You too, you must pour hydraulic acid on your face and make yours look like mine. I'll be at your house in 3 days. If you don't make your face look like this, you will die. Keep what you said. You said you liked this face." And I lost connection with him. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I reported it to the police. However, since there was no evidence, the police only told me to contact them immediately if anything happens. On the 3rd day, on my way back from work, I saw a man wearing a zombie mask and wandering around in front of my house. That almost made my heart stop. I immediately called the police. Luckily, he was immediately caught by the police. He was holding hydraulic acid. However, he told the police that he was also a victim and that he was just doing what he was told. He said that a man he met on Omegle threatened him, saying, "I will kill you unless you do what I order." The police unmasked him, and he really wasn't the guy I met on Omegle. Since then, I live in great fear every day. But after a while, I heard that the man who came to our house had been hit in his face with hydraulic acid. The police struggled to catch the criminal. I moved out right away. A few months later, I heard shocking words along with the news that the criminal has been caught by the police. It was revealed that the criminal had so far sprayed hydraulic acid on 7 people and killed 1. The fact that I was also so close to the tragedy made me sit down on the spot, and I couldn't get up for a long time. After that day, I never talked to a stranger on the internet again. I am a 23-year-old woman. I used to live in a pretty urban area in India when I was 19. I have always loved reading horror stories, just because it's very interesting and there's always something new to read. I never believed in such stories though, because my head can't wrap around the fact that there's something other than the animals and humans we see that can affect our lives, or something that can harm us. Until this one night. I still think that someone out there can explain what happened to me that night. I was living alone in an apartment building. It was in the heart of the city. Restaurants, malls, all around. Hustle bustle all day and night. Nothing scary happened there. It was so alive that my room would still be lit at night with all my lights off. I have always slept with my curtains closed, curtains too thick to let any light through, and a nightlight on. It was a chilly night, so I was using a very thin, bedsheet-like blanket to keep me warm. I dozed off pretty quickly, but I woke up sometime in the night. I had a king-sized bed and was sleeping near the edge facing my right. I was woken up by a pulling sensation, like someone was pulling my blanket. It wasn't the typical horror movie style pulling the blanket from the feet. It was a jolting pull. I turned to my left, but nothing was there. At least, I saw nothing. Then I noticed that every nightlight in my house was switched off. I shrugged it off as a power outage. Although I had a backup battery, I assumed it had been exhausted too. I turned around to go back to sleep, but that's when I felt it again, but this time with greater strength. With the complete sense that nobody's there with me, my body froze. The blanket started pulling up and down, basically in every direction, as if it wanted to remove it from my body. And finally, it did. The blanket started scuffling and folding aggressively behind my back. That's it. No grunting, humming, mumbling, or even creaking of my bed due to such chaotic activity. Just aggressive scuffling of the blanket in the dead silence of the night. It was very close to me, as I could feel the air from the blanket movement on my neck. My heart started jumping out of my chest, and I started crying, and then fainted from all the fear. I woke up the next morning on the same side and in the same position. My blanket was thrown all the way to the other side of the bed. I looked into the mirror and saw rashes around my neck due to the blanket pulling and rubbing. I lived there for a couple more weeks before I moved out. But thinking about that night, it still keeps me awake all night. A few years ago, my mom went to do laundry. Right next to the laundry is a deli that my family likes to eat at. Me and my brother decided to go and help my mother, though we mainly went with her for the food. After about 10 to 15 minutes, me and my brother got bored, so we decided to wait outside on the bench right in front of the laundry where my mom can see us. 5 minutes after that, an old, thin, wrinkly man who looked to be about in his late 50s or early 60s came out of the laundromat and sat down on the hood of a parked car. Me, being the young and shy kid I was, I stopped talking and started looking at the ground to avoid eye contact with him. My brother did the same while fiddling with his fingers. I remember thinking to myself, that's definitely not his car, since I remembered seeing a young man get out of the car that the old man was sitting on. For the next 5 minutes, the old man stared at me and my brother with an unsettling smile while muttering something that I thought sounded like complete gibberish. I started to feel bad for the guy, since I thought he was either mentally ill or completely drunk. After a while, I couldn't stand the unbearable awkwardness, and I said to my brother in a voice loud enough for the old man to hear, "I'm gonna go see if the food is ready," since my mom had ordered the deli food a little while before that. I then got up and started walking to the deli, which was about 30 feet from the bench I was sitting on. I was expecting my brother to catch on to what I was doing and start following me away from the man, but him being his stupid self, he didn't. When I noticed he wasn't following me, I rolled my eyes, walked back to the bench, and whispered to my brother to follow me. He did, and we stayed inside the deli for a little while before walking back inside the laundromat where we found our mother. About 30 minutes later, we all left the area with our food and proceeded to get into the car. Before we left, I looked out the window and saw the old man. He looked different this time though. He had a huge smile on his face. His teeth were yellow, stained, and sharper than usual. His eyes were unnaturally wide, and I could tell he was mumbling something gibberish again. While my mom was searching for her keys, the old man walked up to the window and held out a note. The handwriting was terrible, but I could make out the words. "I always like them better when they're scared. See you again soon." I then looked at the bottom of the stained paper and saw a drawing of a bunch of little girls crying. Their limbs were stretched, making them look like monsters. I felt sick. I suddenly lost all my appetite for the food my mom had just received. I did do something though. Even though I was a shy girl, I still stood my ground. I made a disgusting face at him. The old man stretched his face into a frown. As my mom started the car, the man said in a loud, dark, and scary voice, "Bye-bye, little girl. I hope to see you very soon." My mom drove off, and me and my brother, who had seen all of this as well, just stared at each other in utter shock and disgust. As me and my brother were very young kids, we thought that forgetting about this would have been better than telling someone. I also believed the man would come after me if I ever told on him, so I kept quiet from everyone and decided to live in fear instead. I've never seen or heard from that man again, thankfully. I hope it always stays that way. Remember to stay safe out there, and do what I wish I had done. Tell someone. Tell an adult like your parents, guardians, or if it gets to a more serious point, the police.
My name is Sky, and I'm going to tell you something that happened to me when I was young. It was May of 2011, and I was only 4 at the time. I was at home with my Uncle Jason as my mom had gone out with friends and said she probably wouldn't be back until 5 a.m. So my uncle and I stayed up all night watching movies. I eventually got tired and told my uncle that I wanted to go to bed. At around 3 a.m., I woke up for no reason at all, and I looked out the window. I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was my mom and her friends. But then, I noticed that there was only one person. Suddenly, in one swift movement, the figure ran to my window and tapped at it with a fast speed with his slender finger, and kept saying, "I'll be coming every night, and I will get you, Sky." I froze. It knew my name. When the tapping slowed down, it made a very loud, ear-piercing scream, and then it faded away. It took me a few minutes to gather my strength to move again. But once I did, I ran to my uncle and shook him awake. I told him what I saw. He looked at me and asked me what he looked like. I described him the best I could, and that's when he told me that what I saw was a person of some kind who was going to seriously hurt me. He meant kill me, but he didn't say that because I was so young. And he said he would always protect me and he would always be here for me. It's been 10 years since I saw that man, and my uncle died in September. I still haven't told my mom about this, but I plan to one day. But I still dread to think what would have happened if my uncle wasn't there, and if the man had managed to get into the house. I know how my whole family will die. I know that's not something you would typically hear out of a 13-year-old female. However, I've been having these dreams for years. Now, I'm a lucid dreamer, so some could say it's just my imagination, but I don't think so. I grew up in a big city, but would always go to the coast where some of my family lived for summer vacation. A couple of days before school let out, I had one of these dreams for the first time. My grandpa was in the hospital and he suddenly fell to the floor checking in. I kept hearing this voice in my head saying, "Walk to him, help him up." I listened to this and moved towards my grandpa, who was now slowly rising from his own body. I then woke up to a loud buzzing in my ear. I had this dream a few more times, not thinking much of it as I don't dream very often. In the summer of 2017, I went on my usual vacation. Everything seemed fine the first day. I was hanging out with my cousins and my grandma had her back surgery the next day. However, when I went to bed that night, I had that specific dream, only this time the ending changed. Instead of my grandpa rising from his body, he was screaming and the doctors rushed to him, pushing me out of the way. I then woke up to a loud pounding sound. At first, I thought a picture frame had fallen, but when I looked around the room, everything seemed to be in place. I went out into the hallway to look. All of a sudden, there was more pounding sounds. I wandered into the kitchen to see if that was where the pounding was coming from, only to meet my two older brothers standing there, whispering amongst themselves. I was pretty startled by them as they caught me by surprise. It was 7 a.m, and they usually don't wake up until 10. I asked them if they had heard the pounding too. They hadn't. Now that I knew this pounding was only in my head, I told them about my dream. They were confused, but they said something shocking. My parents left to go to the hospital hours prior. It was my grandpa. A code blue. Come to find out, my grandpa had died due to a heart attack waiting for my grandma to get out of surgery. I also had a few more dreams where I predicted my other grandpa dying of cancer, right as he was told he was cancer-free. Recently, I've been having dreams about my parents. 2 dreams specifically. The first one was just of my mom. She was kayaking on a lake that we usually go to on vacation. Her kayak flipped over, and she drowned. However, since I moved to the coast last year, my dreams have changed. My parents would always be in the car with my younger sister, and they'd get into a huge 4-car crash with 8 fatalities, 3 of them being my family. I'll save the details for next time. For now, let's hope not all dreams come true.
My name is Vicente. This happened to me when a few months ago, and I am currently 25. I was born in a small town in the jungle in Colombia. My mom and dad were very proud to be 100% Colombian. I only spoke Spanish until I became a fluent English speaker when I was in college, because I recently attended an exchange program in Canada. I met my wife on the trip. Her name is Akardi, and she came from Osaka, Japan. When we both finished college, we moved to my old village in Colombia. Akardi works a job at home and I work as an electrician. I was called to work on a power outage at an old office building. It was always sort of normal for power outages in our area because we live in the middle of the jungle. So I drove to the location and I got to work. The weird thing was that the building was 20 miles from our village. I mean, there was an office building isolated in the jungle. Usually, I only get calls within 1 to 2 minutes away. When I was trying to fix the wires, there was something very creepy, in my opinion. I noticed wires that were just ripped open in a way that it looked like someone or something bit out of it. I assumed it was some animal from the jungle since there was a massive hole in the wall. The power came back on, so I went to my truck and I started to drive back when I got a call from my wife. "Hey babe, I headed to the market, so I'll be gone for a few minutes when you get home," said Akardi. "Okay, I'm about 12 minutes away. Love you. Adios, I said. I got startled by a random pop sound on my way home, so I pulled over to the right near a palm tree. It was about 10 p.m., so it was pretty dark out. I got out, and to my shock, instead of a popped tire, it was completely gone. Then I was scared when I found that my spare tire was completely torn to shreds. I called my wife and told her to come pick me up in her car. I suddenly heard a whistling sound come from right next to me. But when I looked to the left, nothing was there. My mom always told me to beware of El Silbón, which means the whistler in Spanish. It was a Colombian urban legend of a man who killed his father and fed the meat to his family. When his grandfather found out, he hired a witch to curse him. When El Silbón was starved to death, his spirit, a tall man wearing a tank top and overalls with a large farmer's hat, roamed the jungle with a bag of bones. They say when he sounds very close, he is far. And when he is close, he sounds far. I kept on hearing the whistling right in my ear, but I still was freaked out by this in the dark jungle. I was all alone in the jungle. I wish that was true, but I wasn't alone. The whistle started sounding a little bit more quiet by the minute. By the time it was almost gone, I was relieved to see headlights up ahead. I started walking towards it thinking that was a carty, but instead I saw a man with an old farmer outfit carrying a bag, just staring with his yellow, glowing eyes. I froze in fear as he started charging at me. Then I heard an engine coming close, and so did the mysterious man. I was shocked to see him not run, but disappear into the thin air. A carty pulled up, and we both were scared when we heard a woman screeching, "Get in, Vicente!" I ran into the car and saw the man stare at us. When we got home, Akarti and I got in the bed, and she kissed me, and we went to sleep. Her back was facing me, and she asked if I knew what the woman was screaming for. I nodded my head, and then realized she couldn't see me, and I said yes, and explained the story about the man that I encountered. She immediately turned over, facing me with a pale face full of fear. My wife had always worried about me, and I loved that about her. But I didn't think she would have believed that this man or thing could just disappear. To my shock, she did. I saw that man first a week ago when I was taking a night walk. I saw him suffocate a man and throw him into a bag while whistling. She fell asleep hugging me. I normally wouldn't fall asleep in that position, but I felt safer that night for some reason. I still wonder what would have happened if Akarti didn't arrive at the time that she did. Would I have ended up in the bag like the other man did?
Back in 2012, when I was 4, me and my mom and stepdad lived in an apartment. All was good until one night. I went to sleep on the couch and my mom was in the chair. We were watching some boring show, so I dozed off. At around 2:30 a.m., I was woken up by something touching me, but it wasn't my mom. It was something in the couch. I started screaming and then the hand went away. My mom, who is now awake, ran to check on me. I told her what happened and she didn't believe me. She just told me to go back to bed. I told her I was afraid, so she stayed with me until my stepdad came back. Fast forward a few weeks later, one night I laid back on the couch. At around 1 a.m., something kept touching me again. I screamed and my mom and stepdad ran to check on me. I told them what happened again, and my mom again didn't believe me, but this time my stepdad did. Later on that night, me and my stepdad were on the 2 lazy boy chairs and were watching Family Guy. My stepdad dozed off and I was about to as well, but then something caught my eye. There were hands sticking out of the couch. I was so shocked I couldn't scream or yell for help. My stepdad woke and saw the blank expression on my face and saw what I was looking at. He sat there in shock just like me. The hands were waving and then we heard a voice. It said in a deep voice, "Want to hold my hand?" I screamed at the top of my lungs after it said that to me and my stepdad. We ran out of the living room and into my mom's room. We explained what happened, and my mom was in shock. We stayed at a motel that night. The next day, we went back to pack our stuff and we left the creepy place. To this day, I still don't know what that was that me and my stepdad saw, but whatever it was, I know it was demonic, and I never want to see it again. My name is Zane. I was 5 years old when this happened. My father always took me to this doctor. I quote the word doctor because personally I don't think he was a real doctor. We went a lot, but mainly we went on the weekends. The place had all sorts of SpongeBob items laying around, and I was only a child there, but since I was so young I never entirely questioned it. The doctor was a tall black male who always wore a suit. Every time we went, it'd be the same thing. He'd take my blood, give me around 5 or 7 shots, and some shots I was even pinned down for. My dad and uncle were usually the ones who took me. My mother was never there. The room we went in for the so-called appointment would always be so weird and creepy. It always had extremely dull lighting. Now, before I continue, this place looked and felt like an actual prison. It was gray everywhere, and those barbed wire fences surrounding it. One way in, and one way out. When I started kindergarten, all of the visits were stopped. We never went again. Around the time I started middle school, my dad put that place down as my doctor and my emergency contact, even when that in fact was not my doctor's office anymore. To this day, my dad, uncle, and my mother, who was aware of these things that were happening, do not remember this place at all. I explain it to them thousands of times, some more detailed than others. It drives me insane that I'm the only one who remembers, and I can't remember the name since I was so young. So please be aware of your surroundings and who's with you. This is a story my grandmother told me when I was 9 years old, and it still gives me goosebumps. I love to listen to stories, even though I'd usually get scared. However, the story I'm about to explain is by far the scariest. There was once a boy, let's call his name Timothy. He had a habit of taking fruits and vegetables from the neighbor's garden along with his friends, Michael, Desmond, and John. They were always later scolded by their parents, but this habit didn't change. One day, they decided to steal from an old lady around 85 years old, which was the greatest mistake they made. The old lady had maize and fruits in the garden. Timothy jumped over the fence, and the others followed along. The old lady became alarmed by a thud coming from her garden, followed by the sounds of dry leaves whenever someone walks over them. The old lady remained on the spot, which was surprising, as they could be murderers. Timothy and the gang began to harvest the fruits until they saw the silhouette. To their surprise, it wasn't the silhouette of a person, but something thin and broom-like. When they saw the creature in front of them, they were paralyzed. In front of them was a living scarecrow crawling from the fence into the garden. They couldn't run away because they were already stiff. It was then that it dawned on them. The old lady was actually a witch who killed her husband and created a scarecrow from his flesh. No one knows what the old lady did to the kids.
Please help. Can you help me?
My name is Natalia, and this experience still traumatizes me to this day. Me and my parents moved into a new house, and the house was barely built, so my dad and his friends went to go paint the walls of our house, and my mom was back in our old house getting our things, and I was at the new house taking care of my little sister. At night, my parents had to go to the store to get more paint, and they told me to stay home to take care of my little sister, and then left. My little sister was in the living room sleeping, and I went to my room. I was tired and totally forgot that my sister was in the living room, so I fell asleep. But while I'm half asleep, I hear glass break, and I get up quickly and hide in my closet until I remember my baby sister was down there. I quietly went down the stairs and snuck into the living room. Thankfully, my baby sister was still sleeping, so I picked her up. But the moment I grabbed her, I heard something coming through the kitchen. I slowly went over to check. In the kitchen, there was a man going through our trash can and eating everything in it. He turned around to look at me, and I ran up the stairs and went to my closet. I was crying as I stayed in there, and I heard footsteps coming from outside my room. He said, "Don't be afraid of me, I just wanted to eat. But now, you're my next meal." I stayed silent and put my baby sister down. Then I got a hammer that was in my closet and went out. The man was outside the door, and I hit him in his head 14 times until I heard my baby sister crying. I got her and went outside, then sat there with my bloody hands and shirt. 5 minutes go by and my parents come home. They asked me what was going on, and still in shock, I told them everything. They called the cops and they took him to the hospital, but on the way to the hospital, he died. I told them it was self-defense, and a few days later we sold the house. 2 years later, the news came up, and it showed our old house, the house that I killed the man in. A girl's body was found in the bathtub with her legs cut off, and I wonder, what if I was that girl? This took place in the summer of 2020. This was the summer when COVID was happening, so I couldn't really go anywhere, but I went to the neighborhood pool and swam for a bit. It was relaxing because I was the only person there. Then I got out and tanned for a little bit. Now, I've always been very self-conscious about my body, so I never wore a bikini, but this year, I decided to actually wear one. So I was laying there tanning, when this older man, probably in his 30s, walked into the pool area and started setting up in the chair right next to mine. Now, usually this wouldn't be a big deal, but seeing that no one else was in the pool area and all the other seats were open, it did kind of worry me. I decided to brush it off and put in my earbuds. Another thing I should mention is that I had never seen him in this neighborhood, which was weird because I knew everyone because it was a small neighborhood and no one new had moved in. This was red flag number 2. So I was just laying there as this guy gets into the pool and swims around for a bit. Then I hear him say something. I couldn't quite make it out, so I paused my music and took my earbud out. He was talking to me. I thought, oh, well, he's just being a friendly person. So I said what? And he repeated his sentence. "Why don't you come swim?" he said. I told him that I already swam and now I was just tanning. Then he said, "Oh, your little body is tan enough. Come swim with me, it'll be fun." This made me very nervous and I didn't know what to say. I have this very bad thing where I get scared to tell people no. So me being the dumb 16-year-old girl that I was, I got up and walked into the pool. On the outside, I was just kinda smiling and laughing and pretending to have a good time, but on the inside, I was terrified. Suddenly, he swam over to me and grabbed my wrist and started pulling me to the deep end. "Oh, it's okay, I'll stay in the shallow end. I'm too tired to swim right now." But he said nothing. We got to the 6-foot end of the pool, and he said, "Want to play a game?" At this point, I was very scared and having trouble treading the water. I said, "I'd rather just get out." And he responded, "Oh, come on, we'll get out after we play this game." But instead, I got out. Now, you would think I would leave the pool, but again, me being the stupid person I am, I just laid back down. Then he walked over and scooted his chair even closer to mine. He then started touching my hair, so I pulled my hair away and got up. I started gathering my stuff, but all of a sudden, he jumped up and said, "Where are you going?" I tried to get around him, but he shoved me in the pool and grabbed me by my shoulder and said, "Now it's time to play that game," and he shoved me under the water. I was there for what felt like forever, struggling, but then I finally kicked away from him and began to swim for the stairs. I sprinted up them and grabbed my bag. I know it seems stupid, but it had my phone and keys in it, so I had to grab it. I ran out of the pool into my car and sped off out of the neighborhood. Once I was a safe distance away, I called the police, but when they arrived, he wasn't there. I was so grateful to have gotten away, and I had forgotten about this man until recently. Now, this incident happened around the same time last year. I haven't moved, and I have been too afraid to go to that pool ever since that incident, so I've only been going to public pools recently, and only with friends and family. But the reason that this story isn't over is because recently, I've been getting the sensation that someone is watching me. Now, this sounds made up and cheesy, I know, but you can just feel it that somebody's eyes are on you. I also have been hearing noises outside my window. It could just be animals, but mixed with the sensation that I'm being watched makes it a little creepier. So one night, I peeked outside the window to see what the noise was, and saw nothing, so I decided to set up a camera outside my room. Now, I didn't really think about it anymore until I heard noise again one night and decided to check the camera the next day. And what I saw gave me goosebumps down my whole body. The same man from the incident last year was outside taking pictures of my house and took pictures even of the inside of my room. I called the cops and told them everything and showed them the surveillance video, and the next night he didn't return, and he hasn't returned since. Now, they did track down who it was by seeing him in the video, and it turns out he has been stalking girls my age before, so that explains why he randomly showed up in my neighborhood, why no one knew who he was, and the sensation that I was being watched. I still have a few questions though. Was he stalking me before the swimming pool incident? How did he find my house? And what really sends chills up my spine is thinking about how he's still out there. And what if he is still stalking me? When I was a little girl, I lived with my parents and little brother in a big house, which used to be a police station. Don't get me wrong, the house was beautiful, but something was very off. It all started when I couldn't sleep in a particular bedroom in the house as a baby, so my parents decided to let me sleep in the other bedroom. So, my little brother was given the room I couldn't sleep in. When I got older, around 5 years old, I had terrible nightmares and sleep paralysis. There was this man that kept visiting me during the night. He was always chasing me in my dreams, and I was so scared of him that I would scream and cry and bang on my closet door while I was asleep. In this dream, I was trying to run away from him. This man was also my sleep paralysis demon. He loved it to scare the hell out of me. He would sit on my bed and stare at me with this terrible smile. Whenever I tried to speak, I went mute. Whenever I tried to move, I would freeze. The only thing I could do was cry and pray to God to save me. I kept my parents up every night because I couldn't sleep. One night, my father had enough of it while I tried to show him that he was standing right behind him. Of course, he didn't believe me. The worst thing is, I could feel his presence wherever I would go around the house. It was terrible, like he was right behind me. I always saw a black figure in the corner of my eye, and I could always feel him chasing me up the hallway stairs and watching me go down the stairs. I would always run up the stairs and down the stairs. When I became a teenager, I told my mom about it in detail. Her face became so white, it was almost scary. She told me that our house was an old police station, and there was one police officer that wasn't friendly at all and a real pervert. When he died, his spirit came back to our house, which was the police station. He refused to rest. She told me that his office used to be the room in which I couldn't sleep in as a baby, the room that my little brother was given. My mom had seen this man too and could feel his presence as well, but so did my brother, and this part made me freeze from head to toe. I had a conversation with him as well last year. He is 16 now. He told me that this man would yell at him to get the hell out of his office. My brother responded to him, "No, this is my room now. You are dead. You have to go, sir." Later, they would get along better and even have conversations. I was so shocked. My brother had to live with this terrible man for years in his bedroom. I asked him why he didn't tell anyone about it, because I assumed he was scared to death. Turned out that he didn't dare to tell my parents because he knew they weren't going to believe him. We moved out of this house when my little sister was born, and there are no spirits in the new house as far as I can tell. I am so glad that that nightmare is over, as we had lived there for 8 years. The first 2 years in our new house, the man visited my brother to ask and see how he was doing, but he isn't scaring him anymore or anything else. He said he's friendly now, but he hasn't seen him anymore. My brother said he's resting now. When I heard that, I felt like I could breathe again. This man is resting now. He is gone. My brother and I can still see spirits to this day, but this one scared me the most out of all of them.
This happened like a year ago. Me and my mom were coming back from the store. Everything was pretty normal. We were just in the car and my mom was driving. Until I noticed there was a green car next to us. I didn't really care that much. But then my mom sped off as soon as I turned green. She explained why she did that. What she said next made my heart drop. There were 2 women in that green car. They got a gun out and were about to shoot my mom. My mom had looked at the side mirror of the car. When she saw it, she hit the gas as soon as the light turned green. I was so scared. The car went a different direction, so they didn't follow us. As soon as we got home, my mom explained everything to my grandfather, who was there waiting for us in the house. My mom didn't know who they were. We didn't look at the license plate or call the police. But now, I always remember about that incident every time I see a green car. I wonder, what would have happened if the car was going the same direction as us? Or if the light hadn't turned green in time?
This is a story that my mom told me about a true story. There was a woman in her late 40s and single who never got to experience having children. One day, she decides to fly to Russia to adopt a child, and once she arrived there, she saw a young and small Russian girl that caught her attention. The woman took her home and raised the child as her own. As the years passed by, the girl and the mother lived a happy, normal life until college rolled in and the girl started hanging out with people that were a very bad influence on her. With time, she became rebellious and vicious and started consuming drugs. One night, the mother and her daughter break out into an argument that the next part is super shocking. The daughter lost control, took a knife, and stabbed the mother to death. The girl was detained by the cops, but the court was stuck whether to consider it a homicide or to declare the girl a psychopath, as they think the girl could have relived a traumatic event from her past before she was put up for adoption. The woman's family wanted nothing to do with the girl anymore, nor did they ever find out what happened to her.
When I was a kid, we lived in a 3-story house, and our closest neighbors lived 2 miles away. It was a hot summer night when we decided to go for a swim at the beach nearby. It was just me and 3 of my closest friends who were staying over for a few days while my parents were out of town. Once we were done, we reached our house and we noticed that one of the lights on the second floor was turned on. We didn't think anything of it until we suddenly heard a loud bang and the light turned off. We all gasped and I dropped my keys on the floor. I'd reached for my phone in my pocket to call the police when I noticed that my phone had died. Suddenly, one of my friends grabbed the keys and opened the door. We called out for her to stop, but before we could grab her, she was already inside the house, rushing towards the stairs to get to the second floor. I asked my other friend to call the police with her phone while I went to look for our friend. I kept the lights turned off and headed to the kitchen to grab a knife, then up to the second floor. I was halfway there when I stopped, holding the knife in front of me, and called out for my friend. When I didn't receive an answer, I got anxious and started slowly heading up. I heard someone whisper my name, but before I could reach the end of the stairs, I saw the police cars through the window. I decided to let them do their job and deal with this, so I ran down the stairs, tripping along the way. I was a breath away from the door when it slammed on my face. I was completely terrified. My heart was beating 1,000 miles an hour. Before I could open the door again, I heard footsteps behind me and immediately froze. I slowly turned around to see a dark figure on my right, pointing a gun at me. At that moment, the police burst into the house, and the invader ran back upstairs. Then I dropped the knife and started bawling my eyes out until the policeman calmed me down. I was so worried about my friend and about the invader that still hadn't been caught. The policeman escorted me outside to my friend, and we waited silently with another policeman so he could search the house and find them both. After a half hour of searching, he finally found my friend, unconscious, but no sign of the dark figure. It seemed like he had knocked her out with something. At the sight of her, I started crying again because I knew that if the police hadn't arrived in time, it could have been me too. Once we made sure she was conscious and okay, we begged the police to please search the house one more time before we would go inside to sleep. But once again, they didn't find anyone. We were all so terrified that we decided to spend the night at a hotel nearby. 5 years passed and my friends and I had lost contact, since both of them had moved to different states and it was hard to keep in touch. My family and I decided to sell our house and move, so we started to go through our things in order to decide what to keep, what to throw away, or donate. My parents handled the upstairs floors, while me and my sister handled the bottom floor and the basement. After a couple hours, it was time to move on to the basement when we stumbled on our father's old suitcase. We tried to pick it up in order to throw it away, but it was very heavy, so we put it down and unzipped it. What we saw inside was terribly horrifying. We saw the bones of a person and screamed. We immediately told our parents, and they called the police. When the police arrived, they took the bones away as we stood there watching. It was then that I recalled the incident that happened all those years ago. And to this day, I still think about it.